It's time once again for another edition of Talk to Me. And now, here's Emmy himself, 8-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Maynard Eaton.
Hello again, my friends, and welcome to this week's edition of Talk to Me, a weekly conversation with cultural influencers, political business influence. Today we have a curator, Robin Williams, an ethnomusicologist. Now, before we begin, welcome, but what does that mean, ethnomusicologist?
Well, it's a long word, isn't it, Maynard?
Yes, a tongue twister.
An ethnomusicologist is a person who devotes their lives studying world music and culture. So, in essence, the culture of music and how it functions in a specific way in that culture.
A good friend of yours told me yesterday that you were such, for years, have been such an icon, a dynamo with regard to music and arts and cultural affairs, that they used to call you Miss Thang. He told me that, yeah.
Well, when I came to Indianapolis from New Orleans, I did make some waves. And it was mainly because I felt that when you're trying to present, again, as an ethnomusicologist, when you're trying to present music, art, culture, that it should really reflect the people who live in that community. So we did some things that were very different. It was very multicultural. You know, we opened, for instance, the Garfield Park Art Center in Indianapolis with the Smithsonian exhibition of Filipino culture and photography. So, you know, we worked with a lot of groups in the city to really reflect the culture and the beauty of that city.
Well, speaking of one of your favorite people from Indianapolis is one of your mentor, right? David Baker. Is that correct?
David Baker was a pivotal influence in my life because he was a jazz cellist. But more than that, he was a composer and an educator and just a tour de force in jazz, period. He was one of the guys that, along with Jamie Ebersol, wrote some of the guidebooks for jazz musicians starting out. And then, you know, it was one of those things that like became a Bible for many jazz musicians to learn how to improvise and create that music. So David was a huge influence on me, and I switched from being a classical cellist to being more of a jazz and pop cellist because of David.
And that's because, again, now Indianapolis is kind of central to your upbringing and your development as an artist and a curator, because that's where you went.
Yeah, I was born in New York City, but then we moved to Indiana when I was 7. So I started playing music when I was 7. I started playing cello when I was 7.
You were born to music, yes, they say.
Yeah, I was born into music because, you know, my mom was an opera singer. My dad was in the news business. He worked for ABC News in New York. But he was always a huge music fan and culture fan. So, you know, he really encouraged me. In fact, he used to drive me to all my cello lessons and my orchestra practices and stuff like that. He was very, very supportive of what I was doing as a musician. But Indianapolis, yes, of course. And then I moved to, right out of college at Indiana University, I moved to New Orleans, and that became another huge influence in my life.
Tell us about New Orleans. I was about to go there. You spent a lot of time in Indianapolis back and forth, but New Orleans really was the basis for much of your influence and the way you've looked at music since then, have you not? With
I was lucky. You know, I was lucky with David Baker giving me my jazz education, and Portia Maltsby, who is a great ethnomusicologist at IU Bloomington, and she also gave me the wings to fly when I got to New Orleans because, you know, I learned all about Black music and Black music history from her. So I had a lot of knowledge by the time I got to this cradle of jazz, cradle of Black music influence in, you know, the United States. New Orleans is it, really, to me. And so I learned a lot because I already knew a lot, but I was able to really enhance my hands-on. You know, I got to work with people that I studied, you know, which was amazing, you know, for a young person in their early 20s to be able to work with, for instance, blues guitarist Wayne Bennett. You know, he was an amazing, amazing artist. And so I got to work with him and so many other seminal artists.
The New Orleans Jazz Institute was part of your creation as well, was it not? A part of your
Well, I went back, I've been bouncing ball between Indianapolis and New Orleans over the years, last 30 years, really. But I went back to Indianapolis, worked very heavily in the arts there. And then, of course, New Orleans called me back in 2008 to be the first director of the New Orleans Jazz Institute at University of New Orleans, a program that Ellis Marsalis started, the great Ellis Marsalis.
Tell us about what's hanging behind you, rhythm, ritual, and resistance. You wrote a book about the
20 year long project. Yeah, 20-year long project. And when I moved to New Orleans the first time, I was exposed to a culture called the Mardi Gras Indians. They now go by the Black Indians. But it's a 400-year-old culture, born out of the struggle of enslaved Africans who were brought here, torn away from their own land. But then they linked with people whose land was torn from them, the Native Americans. And so it's a very deep and amazing culture. But really, when I looked at it, I said, this is more of a way for enslaved Africans to retain their masquerade culture, their spirituality, all of those things were connectors. So I wanted to write about it. I did a 20-year-long study, and then we released the book. Well, it was actually my thesis project at Liberty University in ethnomusicology for my master's. And then we released the book version of it with all the photos and everything that I've been taking over the years.
But it's such a central part to me of New Orleans. My first time there, to see these guys performing in the streets with these lavish costumes is quite an eye-opening experience, is it not?
Yeah, and you have the whole gamut of influences, but some of these guys are lawyers, some of these guys are laborers, So
but they dress up with these lavish costumes that they make themselves.
Right. I mean, they spend an entire year, bead by bead, feather by feather, creating these amazing masquerades, and it's just an incredible thing. And a lot of the guys in the book, when I did the interviews with them, they were like, sometimes things come over us, we don't even know what's happening. Like it's like some ancestral, spiritual, kind of like when you're catching spirited church kind of thing.
You've had a lot of people you've met and worked with in New Orleans. But on a sad note, one of your mentees, somebody you helped raise in the business and took to Germany, trumpeter Terry Gibson, died recently, tragically.
That
took
really
a lot out of you.
A tragic thing. And, he was one of my students at University of New Orleans in the New Orleans Jazz Institute program.
Yeah.
And, so much promise, so much energy, such a beautiful young man. We took him to Germany in 2010. He won the Seeking Satch Award, which was a international trumpet competition. And we took him to Germany. He taught 3,000 people at the Bundeskunsthalle in Bonn, one of the biggest museums there, how to do the second line, how to dance to this music. So he spread joy. He was really a Pied Piper for New Orleans culture wherever he went. So when we found out back in the middle of April that he had passed away in his sleep, 29 years old, Yeah. But I tell you, when we went to that funeral, you would be shocked at how many blocks long of trumpets, tubas, trombones there were of people that he had played with, that he had influenced, that people who loved him. There was one heck of a second line for him.
And a young man at that. It wasn't like he had a decades-long legacy. He made his mark young.
I mean, 29, and he had that kind of an influence. It was just remarkable, really.
You also, early on in your career, had some dealings with Cash Money Records. You had an ebb and flow of different genres of music, have you not? We'll get to another one later. But Cash Money.
I always tell people I knew Lil Wayne when he was really little. Like the bling bling days of Cash Money. I worked as a marketing director for Big Easy Distribution, and it was music distribution. Before these guys got their big record deals, they came to us and we distributed their products. So it was remarkable to see the blossoming of New Orleans hip hop back in it was like mid 90s, 95, 96.
Let's talk about two other stops on your Cat of Nine Lives and music, the places you've been.
Right.
Indianapolis public schools. So you went from Cash Money, New Orleans, and all that to teaching students jazz or music in Indianapolis. Was that it?
It's all about getting people to be joyful about learning, and that's what we did. I really again saw the incredible effect of having kids get involved in the arts, but then learning about other cultures and learning about themselves in the process. And we were able to do that. We started a Mardi Gras parade because they knew I was from New Orleans. They had to have me bring the Mardi Gras element in. 100 kids the first year, 500 kids the second year. Then it just blossomed into like 2,000 kids. And it was amazing because it was a celebration of what they were learning in the after school programs about culture and the arts.
What is it about culture and the arts? Why is this important? What does it matter to cities and people and communities? The arts. It sounds innocuous, but it's really insidious. It really gets you, doesn't it?
The arts are a reflection of the human experience, and that's why the arts are absolutely necessary for quality of life. Not only quality of life, but understanding of each other and of ourselves. And so if we're going to bring folks together, then we need to use the arts as a vehicle for that. I've always believed that, and I still believe that to this day.
You also had a stint in Atlanta with the Fulton County Arts exhibits. Am I saying that correctly? Fulton County Arts City of Art art exhibitions, where you did a number of things, including the Tuskegee Airmen.
Right. I came there 2014 to spearhead the Aviation Community Cultural Center for
Cultural
Fulton.
Center, yes, excuse me.
Yes. And we opened it. I was there at the very beginning when they were still finishing the build out on the building. It's an amazing space, amazing place. And it was really dedicated to not only culture and arts, but also the legacy of Blacks in aviation. So one of the first people, that I contacted was the head of the Tuskegee Airmen, which has been around for over 40 years in Atlanta. 70, well, it was 75 years, so I guess it's 80 years now, because that was about 5 years ago that we created the exhibition that really, Nest of Eagles was the name of the exhibition, and it was really celebrating the legacy of Tuskegee Airmen. But what an incredible opportunity for me as a curator and as a creator of culture programs to be able to work with them, and just the stories. I mean, it was just really amazing. I'll never forget it.
You went from that historical stuff to the Oshobo School of Art in Nigeria, an exhibition of that. Tell me about that. Tell us about
another 20-year-long project of mine, another passion project of mine, just like the Black Indians. Right. I've been collecting this work for 20 years, and mainly because the artists themselves have been giving the works to me. They've been donating the works to me. I guess I remind them a lot of this lady, Suzanne Wenger, who was from Germany, and she came to Oshobo many, many years ago. She ended up spending her entire life there and creating an art school and an art movement, which is now world renowned. In fact, she was responsible for, becoming a World Heritage Site through UNESCO.
You're now en route to a new opportunity, a new excursion, a new adventure with the Delphi Opera House in Delphi, Indiana. Small, beautiful little spot, but it's a whole different territory for you to go out to music, is it not? I mean, this is a little different. This is not a jazz place.
Well, but it might become one. If I have anything to do with it, we're going to have some jazz, and we're going to have a veritable cornucopia, gumbo, if you will, of cultural influences and flavors through the music that we'll be presenting henceforth. But yeah, this is a really interesting project because it was opened in 1865. And that year, it was the tallest building in the state of Indiana. Okay. And then they shut it down in 1914. And then it was dormant for like 101 years, falling down practically. And then a $10 million grant came into the city, and they renovated and restored this amazing opera house. It only seats 235 people. But it provides, just a really beautiful, intimate space for music. The cool thing about it for me, even though it's in a small town, it's 3,000 people in Delphi, but because of the rich history and its close proximity to Purdue University, I do foresee that we're going to be creating a lot of really great and dynamic partnerships with Purdue.
You influenced music from Germany to New Orleans to Indianapolis. Is this your toughest challenge? Will you be able to influence the flavor and style of music in a little town like that?
I never back up from a challenge. I never do. You know, with wisdom at this point in my life and career, I think I will choose my battles if there are any, and hopefully there won't be. But I do foresee that this might be challenging, but I think it's also going to be really exhilarating and a great opportunity for me to, again, create another opportunity for people to have access to the arts and to be exposed to things that maybe they weren't exposed to before.
You think because you think music and arts brings folks together despite your maybe differences, right?
I totally agree with that. And it's been the common thread and theme and vision and mission of my life.
Speaking of theme, we're going to end on a note. Our theme music is produced by a wonderful client of yours named Alexey Marti, who's going to be performing at the Atlanta Jazz Festival. Before we hear his latest release, tell us a bit about Alexey.
Alexey is from Havana, Cuba.
Yeah.
And he's an incredibly dynamic young man. Well, he's not as young as he used to be. When I first met him in 2008, when I was director of the New Orleans Jazz Institute. And he came just recently at that time from Cuba, played with an incredible group, Irakere, in Cuba, and had a tremendous amount of background, but he wanted to become more of a composer. So I actually helped him get into University of New Orleans and study composition. And last year, the music was in consideration for a Grammy and other things. I mean, he's just really blossomed. And so it's amazing to be able to present him for the Atlanta Jazz Festival coming up September 5th. He'll be performing on the stage.
Robert Williams, thank you so much. Thank you, our Talk to Me audience. And we're going to end our show listening and enjoying Alexey Marti's latest release. Thank you. See you next week.
I like it when you do that to me, baby. I like it when you do it to me, baby. Oh, baby. I like it when you do that to me, baby. Oh, yeah. I like it when you do it to me, baby. Check it out. Sometimes in our life there is a love that cannot be forgotten. My desires for you are stirring up inside my head and heart, and I miss you, and at times I'm completely polarized by this emotion of my desire of wanting to be with you. So I will sit with this for a moment, this emotional turmoil. Gonna reflect on what we did and what we said.